Hello, everybody. This is Eric Apricot, and I have Perks from Warriors Reddit and GSWCBA on Blue Sky. Thanks for joining me, Perks. The Jimmy Butler trade just became official, right?
It was yesterday. So here's the thing, the league office is a little backed up. Technically, the trade deadline was over at 3 p.m., so we should have seen an announcement then, but they announced a little later just because it's a lot of paperwork they have to process. I think there was like maybe 20-something deals that happened yesterday. This is a little trade machine I built. So it was a 5-team trade. Dunleavy's starting to have this penchant for doing these multi-team trades. We did the first 6-team deal in history when they did the Klay Thompson trade. Now we got a big 5-team deal here. But starting at the Warriors side, right, they sent out 4 players, Wiggins, Schroeder, Anderson, Waters, and then they sent out this 2025 top 10 protected pick. And more than likely, should very likely be conveyed. If for whatever reason it doesn't, it then turns into a 2026 top 10 protected pick. And then if that doesn't convey for some reason, the Heat would get the 2027 pick unprotected. The Heat will be getting a first. I think we all expect that first to be this year just because the Warriors shouldn't really be a lottery team.
Part of that is that there aren't enough teams tanking that are so bad that it just would be hard to out-tank a lot of these teams.
Yeah, pretty much. We heard from the Warriors that they didn't necessarily love this draft, at least not the late first round talent. So I think they obviously want to make the playoffs, not be a lottery team, and then they'll let the Heat have this pick. And if the Heat do get this pick, then that kind of opens up the Warriors to be able to trade more first.
So there's the Stepien rule, which is supposed to prevent owners from being so stupid that they trade all of their first round picks.
This GM back in the day traded every single pick, basically. So the rule is that you can't go back-to-back drafts without having a pick.
And then the subtlety of it is a pick like the Warriors just traded. It's probably going to convey in 2025, but it might convey in 2026 or 2027. So right now, the Warriors can't trade any pick within 1 year of 2025, 2026, or 2027, right?
Correct, yeah. So basically all the picks are frozen as of this current moment. But as soon as this pick conveys to Miami, that frees up everything.
But in theory, they could trade like top 5 protected to another team, right? 6 through 10.
Yeah, so they could structure it in a way where Miami gets 11 through 30, and then the Warriors keep 1 through 5, and then they give 6 through 10 to another team. It's something like that, I think, would work.
Okay. So you had the 4 players out. You've got the 2 picks, and then Jimmy Butler coming in.
Outside of the first, the Warriors actually sent out a 31st second, and that pick is ending up with Detroit. And that was a pick the Warriors actually initially sent out in the Timberwolves trade when they acquired Kyle Anderson, and Timberwolves had the right to swap that pick. And so the Warriors would get the least favorable of Minnesota and their own pick in 2031, and now they just completely gave up on that pick and gave it to Detroit to take on that salary. What's significant about that is the Warriors are now down to 2 seconds. One of those seconds is for this season, which is the Miami pick, second rounder. More than likely conveys to the Warriors. It's only top 37 protected. And the only other pick they have in the second round is this 2030 pick that is actually a part of the Washington trade as a stipulation.
Okay. And the downside of not having so many second round picks is that, number one, it's really good to grease trades with 1 to 5 second round picks. Number two, the Warriors have been quite good at drafting the second round. And on the other hand, you can buy second round picks usually. So Quinten Post's pick was bought back from, I guess, Portland, I think was the last team to have that. And then,
yeah, that pick has a funny story because they originally got that in the Corey Joseph salary dump, and then they traded it to the Thunder for Lindy Waters.
Yeah, I remember the Quinten Post draft day, which we were all doing live on DNHQ. And as I remember it, first the Lindy Waters news came out fairly early. And so that was exciting, but also depressing because then there was no draft pick. And then when I think 52 came around, I think it was announced that Quinten Post was drafted by OKC. And I felt very depressed because that was the person that I thought Golden State was targeting. And then it was announced that there was a trade.
The Thunder traded it to Portland, and the Warriors bought it back from Portland. So it went through a bunch of hands.
So it was a very confusing draft day.
But yeah, they can't acquire picks. Teams tend to usually do that on draft day. So I think it hurts the Warriors more so if they want to do a Dennis Schroeder type trade where they send out a couple seconds to acquire a player. That's why the Schroeder trade maybe hurts them a little bit because you sent out these assets for a player that you ended up dumping, 2 months later. A key detail is Jimmy Butler get a 15% trade bonus, which is capped by the maximum salary. So he could have added $400,000 to his contract. It would have been paid by the Heat. It just would have been on the Warriors books. But according to Bobby Marks, that's been waived. So that's going to give the Warriors, if you see here, the adjusted apron space. After the trade, they have below the hard cap, and then they have 3 roster spots to fill. And then this is my projected number of the cost it's going to take to do that. Yeah, Jimmy waiving his bonus definitely helps him a little bit to give a little breathing room. Had he not done that, by my calculations, if the Warriors had filled out the roster the cheapest way possible, they would have finished the season at $12,000 underneath the hard cap, which is like basically a hair below it.
Wow. Okay.
It's interesting.
And Butler gives this impression of someone who wants every single dollar that's owed to him. So it was not to be assumed that he would waive this trade kicker.
Yeah, I thought he would just keep it because the math works and then Miami would pay for it. But the fact that he's waiving it is a sign that he's committed, and the $400,000 isn't worth him as much as giving the Warriors a little bit more flexibility to try to fill out this roster.
Basketball wise, how are we feeling about that?
Jimmy's a great player. He's definitely going to help them. He's going to make them better. He's going to elevate the top level of their lineups, give Steph some breathing room. The Warriors needed to do something just because you look at this roster, it wasn't going anywhere. They were very mediocre. If you look at what they gave up in terms of long-term future assets, it's not really much. Wiggins hurts. I think we all loved him. You give up a couple rotation players. You give up that 2025 pick. I think the cost wasn't exuberant.
I think the deal as a deal is great. It's way better than I expected. You gave out Schroeder and Anderson and Waters, even though I find them all very likable and easy to root for. Statistically, they were rather negative for the team. And Wiggins, I think he was one of the best players on the team for the last couple of weeks, but some analytics don't like him. Also, if you're getting an all-star, you have to trade something. So you can't just trade the worst players on your team and a protected pick. Given all the possibilities, somehow they managed to get Jimmy Butler for no young people. I was prepared for Kuminga, Moody, Trace, Podge, any of these guys to be going out, and it didn't happen. So I just find this a sort of astounding bargain from that point of view. I've seen a couple of articles saying 2 timelines is dead, but weirdly enough, I think 2 timelines is now alive.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think if anything, this is more of them leaning into the 2 timeline thing because you've structured it in a way where you've set up this window of Steph, Jimmy, and Draymond and a collection of guys. And maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't. If it doesn't, you still basically have your entire arsenal of picks. You still have Pods, you still have JK. So you can either pivot to a rebuild, which I don't think any of us want, but is a realistic option, or you can turn Jimmy's salary into another player or another combination of players. So they still have a ton of optionality.
Butler's got to be the second best offensive player Steph has ever played with all due respect to Clay.
Yeah.
Outside of KD, there just hasn't ever been someone who's a high-level shot creator and closer like Jimmy. So if he's not washed or demonic or injured, then this could be really, really good. We probably dropped 8 to 10 games this year where there was a really significant lead that the Warriors should have held on to. And if the Warriors win half those games, suddenly the season looks really different.
I don't know if they'll be contention level. I think that's maybe pushing it, but I definitely think they can be a team that can make some noise in the playoffs and definitely not someone people want to see. So, but that's, best case scenario.
I agree. So I'm expecting a circus whenever Jimmy Butler is available for his next extension. When would the next reasonable time be for him to be wanting an extension?
Yeah, so if we go over here to my spreadsheet, this is currently what their future roster outlook is. So for Jimmy, because he signed his extension, it should be the 2nd anniversary when he is eligible for another extension. However, because he's going to be in the final year of his contract, it will actually be the start of the next season. So he will be extension eligible starting in 2026 July.
So that's the date he could actually sign it.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think about people being upset about not getting extensions. Do they start getting upset as soon as that day comes when they're extension eligible, or do they start getting upset in advance?
It's a good question. It's hard to get upset in advance because the team legally can't extend you. I do think him and his representation will probably start having conversations with the Warriors prior to that deadline to see where both parties are aligned to. I believe with the Heat specifically, I don't know the exact timeline, but I think it was just around the time he would be extension eligible where they started having these issues.
Okay. So I was hoping we'd get through this season for sure without any kind of extension stuff. The guy hasn't even hit the extension. And maybe even next season. That is my hope. You can see I have extremely low bar for the level of drama that Jimmy's going to bring to this team.
I don't think any extension talks are going to be the concern. If anything happens, I think if Jimmy starts just not being happy with the environment and the way the thing's going, maybe he, tries to force a trade. But I don't think he'll get upset for money reasons. It would probably be more so like roster fit reasons.
Okay, so after the trade, the first 11 players on your spreadsheet are properly signed, but unfortunately 12 is the minimum number. You've mentioned that they're going to change Quinten Post's two-way to a minimum, so that brings us to 12.
Yep. Teams are not allowed to have less than 12 players, so Quinten Post will be converted today. The reason it has to be Post is because of the fact that he is a drafted player, because Post has 0 years of service. He's a rookie. He's at this level right here. And the full rookie minimum is about 1.1, 1.2 million. And then as the season goes on, each day you subtract about 7,000 from it. Post will be signing on February, today's the 7th, so he'll be making 439,000. If the Warriors sign anyone else right now, it costs this much right here, 800,000. And that's even if you convert Jackson Rowe, who's a rookie, but for apron purposes, he would count at this figure because he's not a draft pick. That's just a rule the NBA does because they don't want these teams pushing the hard cap to discriminate against older veterans. So essentially everyone, regardless of years of service, counts at this figure unless you drafted that player. They don't really have enough space to really sign someone else right now.
I'm really happy to see Post is thriving. Obviously still a rookie, pretty raw. He's not the savior, but for the 52nd pick and a guy who was hard stuck in the G League for the first part of the season, this is pretty great. He's good enough to actually start games, even though he's more or less starting as a role player. When we were talking about Post early on, I said that I thought he would be ready pretty quickly from the offensive running the game point of view. That is holding true. And my only questions were whether his shot would hold up and whether his defense would be playable. And it looks like it's tolerable right now.
Yeah, and I feel like he grew a lot in the G League that first part of the season, especially the way he moves on the defensive end and how he works within the flow of the offense. His second game, he did one of the veteran Warriors center moves where you catch the ball and then you bounce it between your legs to a Steph kind of flipping around you by the corner. And Steph didn't even anticipate that happening. So it shows you how Post has really adjusted well within their system. And he has the skill set they need. Maybe he shouldn't be starting, maybe a bit more situational use, just because I think if you overwhelm him with all these minutes and responsibilities, it might be more of a detriment to him. But I do think he's performed well.
Yeah, I agree. Curtis keep checking some of these lineup moves. Because I remember, I think Post, in his very first real game, I think it's against Sacramento, he ended up not only playing minutes, but then I think he played crunch time too.
Yeah.
Which I felt was a little crazy. Like that was a real, he checked from Curry. I think he made a couple of mistakes that were not really good for the game. I think right now, he's perfectly good as a backup center. Okay, so Quinten Post is a 12th spot. So how many more spots are the Warriors going to fill?
Yes, so they have to be at 12, and then on the season, they have to be at 14, but for 28 days in the season and 14 days at a time, you are allowed to be underneath 14 as long as you are not under 12. Right here is essentially the cheapest way of structuring this. So you would convert Quinten today, and then you would do that 14-day grace period. And then on the 20th, you could sign 2 10-day contracts. That would bring up the roster to 14, and that would bring you about 1.1 million below the hard cap. And then after those 10 days expire, you'd be allowed to wait another 14 days before you would have to fill out the roster. And then in that case, the Warriors would do these 2 rest of season contracts, bringing them 436,000 below the hard cap. And then if they make the playoffs, I would expect them to sign a 15th player on the very last day of the season, only costing them about 12,000. And as of now, if they did it this cheapest route, they would be able to fill out the roster while being about 425,000 below the hard cap.
So if they make the playoffs, why would they sign the 15th person?
Just to have the extra body, because you can't play 2-way guys in the playoffs. So let's say you go into it with 14 and then a couple of guys start having injuries. That kind of limits your ability of who you can put on the floor. Like last year, the Warriors converted Usman Garuba on the last day of the season just to have him as an extra body. So I would expect them to go with 15 into the playoffs.
But would all 15 be playoff eligible?
Yeah, yes, they would.
Oh. Okay, so to fill the last 2 spots, spot 13 and 14, they're going to use a combination of 10 days and maybe buyout candidates or minimums from other unsigned free agents, right?
Yeah, because Jimmy waived his trade bonus, it gives them a little bit more flexibility. So the Warriors could scratch the 2 10 days and actually just do one of the rest of season contracts. And the reason this is significant is guys might not want to be waiting around until March 16th to sign a deal. And maybe they wouldn't be happy with a 10-day and then waiting. By being able to sign someone earlier, I think it gives you a better chance of getting one of those top level buyout guys. The one thing I would say about the buyouts is money isn't really the biggest factor, honestly, because the thing about buyout guys is they're already getting paid, right? They're bought out of their contracts. They give up a little bit of money, but usually they give up the value they'll get back from a minimum contract. The money you have to give isn't really as important as what you offer as a team, right? In terms of not only playing time, but roster fit. Are you, a playoff team? So I think what will be more so important for the Warriors is how they look heading into the playoffs and what kind of minutes they have to give up.
Is it too early to talk about the buyout market?
No, I mean, we can start. The deadline for teams to buy out players and for them to retain their playoff eligibility is March 1st. There's still about, a month for that to happen, but we can talk about the type of players who might become available. We're already hearing some names who are being, cut.
What are some names that are attractive on the buyout market?
Sure. This is the depth chart for every team in the league. I was looking through it, and there aren't really too many names I think are that attractive. Generally, buyout guys are guys who are in the last year of their contract because teams don't really want to hold on to too much money before. That's why I've seen some people talk about Chris Middleton. Middleton has a player option for next season, so he would obviously exercise that. So if the Wizards cut him, they would have him on the books for not only this year, but next year. So I don't think Middleton would be a buyout guy just because I think the Wizards would rather have him as an expiring contract for next season. They don't really benefit from cutting him. So the players you want to look at are guys in their last year of their contract, likely on teams who aren't really doing anything in the playoffs, or maybe want to open a roster spot to convert a two-way guy or grab someone from the G League. So of the guys who are already being cut, you have guys like Ben Simmons is a big name. He's already meeting with teams like Cleveland, the Clippers, teams like that. Another thing important about the buyout market is for any team above the first apron, they are not allowed to sign a player who has made more than the 12.89 taxpayer mid-level. So that's teams like Boston, Denver, Lakers, Bucks, Timberwolves, Knicks, and Suns, I think, is all of them. For example, they can't sign someone like Ben Simmons because Simmons made way more than that 12.8 million. Because the Warriors are below the first apron, they have an advantage when it comes to that.
That's great. Yeah, Ben Simmons probably won't happen because he's already linked to Cleveland and the Clippers. Who are the other appetizing people above the mid-level?
Yeah, so I mean, if we go through the rosters, the Hawks maybe have a couple of expiring contracts here in Karis LeVert, Larry Nance, Clint Capella. I don't know if they would buy out any of them. Maybe they would rather hold on to them and have those bird rights, maybe sign and trade them somewhere. But if they did, I think someone like Larry Nance would be an interesting addition. Moving a little bit lower, Bojan Bogdanovic, I think, is maybe one of the names that are more interesting. He's an expiring contract. Brooklyn doesn't really have a need for him. I think a lot of teams would be interested. I think his shooting and his size would be something the Warriors would be interested in. Our good friend Melton here probably gets bought out, but he's hurt for the season. D'Lo's another expiring contract. I don't know if the Nets would buy him out. Maybe they want those bird rights. And then Seth Curry is another interesting name, obviously. A brother of Steph. The Hornets do want to open up a roster spot to sign Diabate to, so Curry might be a guy on the chopping block. Bulls, Trey Jones is an expiring contract. I don't think they would buy him out, though. What else do we have? Cody Zeller probably gets bought out, but don't know if the Warriors would have much interest in that. Marvin Bagley, who just got acquired by the Grizzlies, is another expiring contract. Don't know if he would be a great fit, but someone who could get potentially bought out.
The man drafted before Luka and Trey, right?
A big name right there. And Boucher had a lot of trade interest around him, so I think the Raptors would probably just hold on to him, maybe sign and trade him somewhere in the summer. Tucker, however, definitely I think will get bought out. He's pretty washed, so I don't think the Warriors would be interested. They did like him in the past, though. And then I think the last name maybe that is worth looking at is Malcolm Brogdon. He hasn't played like a ton recently. He might be a little washed, but I do think the Wizards buy him out. And the Warriors traded Dennis, so they need a point guard.
I think at least the ghost of Brogdon is very attractive. At one point, he was quite a good player. And if he could come and play combo guard, point guard backup, that sounds pretty good for a minimum flyer.
If he can at all offer anything on a rest of season deal, I think it's worth taking a look. Daniel Theis I might be interested in just because he's a pretty decent center, can offer a little bit of floor spacing.
Yeah.
Give you a little boost in that center rotation. Josh Richardson, good veteran wing. And then the last name I'm curious in is actually Chris Duarte. He is also 2A eligible, and he's famously the man the Warriors were considering drafting where they drafted Moody. So maybe they finally get their guy back. But if you look at all those names and teams we went through, it's not really shaping up to be in a very attractive buyout market outside of Ben Simmons. Maybe you can get like a Bojan or a Malcolm Brogdon, but otherwise it's just going to be a lot of low-level guys.
So the buyout people are usually going to just take a minimum for the rest of the season. So you pretty much have to get someone who's going to help you right away. it's not like you can take someone and stash them on your roster for development.
What do you mean by that?
So, for instance, you've got Marquise Bolden over there, the Summer League standout before his injury. In theory, the Warriors could grab him on a minimum to just get him back into their system.
Sure. They could even sign him to two-way. So every guy there in like the yellowish color is two-way eligible. So you could do something like when you convert Quinten Post, right, you're going to open up a two-way spot. So you could sign someone like Marquise Bolden. You could sign someone like Chris Duarte to occupy that two-way spot. So that's another thing to factor in. And two-ways don't count against the cap.
Maybe we should just briefly talk about the two-ways then. So QP
Sure.
will be elevated. That will open up a two-way. You mentioned maybe they'll get Duarte, maybe Bolden from the Summer League, although he was injured. I don't know his situation.
Yeah, I don't think he's played anywhere else. He's still rehabbing from that injury. So I just have him on there because he's someone who was in the system. He looked good. He's a free agent. I think Bolden would make more sense if the Warriors elevate someone like Kevin Knox, create a spot on the Santa Cruz roster, and then Bolden signs a G League contract and the Warriors bring him in to Santa Cruz. That I think would make more sense for a guy like Bolden.
Okay. Do you have any ideas what they might do with the third two-way spot?
Honestly, no. I haven't really looked into that. Santa Cruz has some guys who have been performing well. I like Javon Johnson. He's two-way eligible. He's had a good couple games. Actually scored 36 points the other day. That's an intriguing talent they could put on the two-way.
Javon Johnson, he's like a lanky athletic wing, yes?
Yeah, and that three ball he has is he can shoot that thing.
All right. That sounds good to me. Just tell me the three-point percentage, and then at this point, the Warriors need it.
I'm a big fan of Lester Quinones. He's been killing it in the G League. I wouldn't mind to see a reunion there. I don't know if they would be interested, if Lester would be interested. Otherwise, just take a swing at a guy like Duarte or Roddy or City Sissoko just became eligible. There's definitely two-way level talent out there. The G League has a ton of guys too who have been killing it. I think there's options for sure.
Yeah, good old Lester Quinones. A bunch of my favorite celebration audit people are traded, so there's definitely Lester's all-time celebrate.
It's needed. We need our base.
Okay, so then I guess we haven't talked about the 10 days. And so, so the Warriors do need to sign someone fast. And one name that was been kicking around is good old Kevin Knox, who the Warriors pulled in during the Summer League, and he was a real breakout candidate there. But he's not eligible for two-way because he's just bounced around too many years in the NBA.
Yep.
He's now with a G League team, but he can't get a two-way as a smooth way into the NBA. And you've been noting that he might be a good candidate for a 10-day contract.
Yeah, I mean, he's been in the Santa Cruz system. I think he's adjusted really well to it. He's a high-level talent. He's been dropping 30-point games, and not that, dropping a ton of points is necessarily the metric you judge these G League level guys by. Knox is a good scorer. He's a rangy wing. His three ball has looked really nice. He's been doing things defensively. So as this bigger wing who can do a lot of things with the ball, I think he would be a good fit. The Warriors will need to sign a 10-day on February 20th at least. So I 100% expect that to go to Knox. Well, the way he's played, he's earned it. And the way he's fit into their play style, he's been a good addition. So I wouldn't be surprised if Knox gets that 10-day and then maybe turns that into a rest of year deal in March. So that's one of the roster spots. Unless they can get Ben Simmons or Bojan Bogdanovic or Malcolm Brogdon for those last two spots, I would expect Knox to be on the roster for the playoffs.
That makes sense because he already knows the system from Santa Cruz.
Yeah.
And I won't rehash the whole Kevin Knox story, but we discussed him thoroughly, his whole spectacular Summer League debut and performance. And it was just crazy and chaotic, but also really talented. So I would be really happy for him if he managed to make the team.
Yeah, I had a chance to talk to Kevin a little bit during Summer League. And for a guy who was a former lottery pick, played for a team like the Knicks, he's a really grounded person. And he definitely came into that Summer League opportunity with the belief that, hey, I belong in this league and I'm going to show it. And he didn't go out there and just start chucking 20 field goals a game, but he really made an effort to play within their system. And I think that really stood out.
Since I got to crow about Quinten Post, I should note that you have been always a big supporter of Jackson Rowe. And I was never an unsupporter, but I never thought he popped. But he's now got the two-way, and I think he did play decently in his limited minutes.
Rose has been a guy I've been a fan of for the past 2 years. He's someone who his play style reminds me a little bit of Justin Holiday from back in the day. He's an older guy around, I think he's 28. He played in Canada for a long time. He tried out with Santa Cruz last season. It's very rare for G League tryouts to make the G League roster. He made the roster. Another guy actually who went that pathway was Juan Toscano Anderson, by the way. But Rowe did a tryout, was on Santa Cruz last year, had a really good first season. They brought him to Summer League, looked good in Summer League, gave him that Exhibit 10, brought him back to Santa Cruz. And he's been playing really well, and I think he's just earned it. He's an older player, but Damian Lee, Juan Toscano Anderson, they were guys who had productive NBA careers when they were in that late 20s age. So I think Rowe is a good addition for a two-way. He actually signed a 2-year deal, so the same thing. Pat Spencer signed last year, so Rowe will be rostered for not only this year, but next year on that two-way, which I think for a player of his level is a bargain for the Warriors to have a guy like that locked in on a two-way for 2 years. I guess a year and a half is a more accurate way of putting it. But Rowe's a good player. I don't know if maybe he's the type of guy the Warriors would convert the last day of the season to have that extra body as a 15th. Pat Spencer could be another one as well.
Yeah. So Pat Spencer's another guy that you've been boosting, and I think he looks like a legit backup point guard now.
Yeah, he's another older player like Rowe. He's been in and around G League and the NBA for a couple seasons now. Just a really steady-handed guy, doesn't really turn the ball over, pretty bouncy and athletic, and he can score around the rim. So I think if the Warriors need a third point guard. Plus his two-way games are going up there. I think he's at 28 out of 50 now, so he can only participate in 22 more games for the rest of the season. So I don't know if they will use some of those for the next couple of weeks while they have injuries and the roster isn't filled out. But yeah, I think Spencer could be a good candidate for them to elevate on that last day of the season.
And Pat Spencer has unexpected hops. He did throw down a poster dunk. Sad the Warriors blew that game because they didn't get to make a video about that. It must be those lacrosse legs.
Hey, there you got some thick legs from playing all that lacrosse.
Okay, so do we have any other ideas about the 10 days?
I'm not sure, especially because with Butler waiving that bonus, it allows them to not have to sign 10 days. He could actually just sign a guy for the rest of the season in February. So I think we'll have to see after the dust settles from the trade deadline who becomes available, who gets bought out.
So I said that the Jimmy Butler trade was a kind of remarkable bargain from a strict cost point of view, but there's the hidden cost that we've given Jimmy a whole bunch of money, and there's this worry in Dub Nation that this might prevent JK from being re-signed or Steph from being re-signed or weird penalties.
I have this little salary outlook projected here on the screen. Starting 25-26, as of now, you have basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You have 8 guys penciled in with contracts: Steph, Jimmy, Draymond, and then Moody on his extension, Buddy Paz, TJ DeGee. And then the big question here is Kuminga, right? What does his extension look like? Right now, I have put in as a placeholder what the Warriors reportedly had offered him prior to the extension deadline passing, which was a 5-year, $150 million. So that would start off JK at about $25.9 million, and then that increasing. The cheapest way of filling out the roster right now would have them about $2.8 million below the second apron. So what's significant about that is if they re-sign Kuminga at this level of a figure, it just puts a lot of burden on them in terms of filling out the rest of the roster because you don't have access to the mid-level. You can't really do trades where you're getting back more than 100% of what you're sending out. So you essentially have to fill out the roster with minimums. And then maybe you can move around like a Moody and a Buddy contract, or maybe you sell off Draymond or Jimmy somewhere.
So if they were under the first apron, they would have the bigger mid-level.
Yeah, it'd be projected around $14.1 million for next year.
So that's what they signed, I think, Melton with this time. So because they're projected to be over the first apron because of Jimmy's contract, don't they still get the smaller mid-level? So you're saying that they would have the taxpayer, but there just wouldn't be room under the second apron.
Yeah, so if you put the taxpayer mid-level instead of a minimum level contract, it pushed them over the apron by $500,000. Now, they can give someone a little bit less than the full taxpayer mid-level. If you gave someone like a $5 million, then you can fit that underneath the second apron. But it does put a limit on what you have at your disposal.
So now just thinking about the opportunity cost of this Butler trade, it's like they locked in something like $15 million more than they would have if they hadn't consolidated into Butler. And if they had that money, then they actually could use the full mid-level and other exceptions to help fill out the team better.
Yeah, I think when I was looking at projections pre-Jimmy Butler trade, I had them with the same structure here, but I think there was a way for them to work in a non-taxpayer mid-level with their first-round pick or some sort of combination of that. So there were ways to add a bit more like salary around the edges.
Yeah, so you could add a solid average NBA player.
Yeah, pretty much. Maybe even 2, honestly.
I hadn't noticed the first time through that this wasn't including Looney and GP2. So this is not going to make some of their fans, including me, happy that they're not in this. But in theory, you could bring them back on minimums if they're not outbid.
Yeah, or you could even bring them above minimum. So you have full bird rights on both. So you could give them like anything, honestly, up to their maximum. You could give them 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. So I think bringing them back is more of a question in terms of where do the Warriors want to sit in relation with the apron? And then, how much are they willing to spend on this roster, right? Because the tax, especially the repeater rate, is changing up this season. So if you look here, the current season, this is what the repeater rate is looking like. For that first 5 million bracket, it's for each dollar over, it's 250. But starting next season, it's increasing to 3 and then 325 and 550. So it's going to be a lot more expensive to be in the tax.
So let's talk about Kuminga's extension. How much could the Warriors give him above that original offer?
Yeah, so right here, this was my projection / what the Warriors actually reportedly were offering him. So I predicted in terms of what that deal could look like. So that's around 150 million for 5 years. And then I also was including some incentives in here. The full contract the Warriors could give him all the way up to his max is 225 million for 5 years. And reportedly, this is around what JK was seeking. This compared to what he could get as a restricted free agent from another team is for 4 years only at 166 billion total. The average annual is about a 3.3 million difference, and then he'd be giving up that 50 year if he ends up taking an offer sheet somewhere. So Warriors can't be outbid on JK. They can re-sign him. It's just a question of what that price point is and if they want to pay whatever the tax is going to look on that roster construction.
So Jimmy Butler isn't actually constraining how much they can give JK. Or is that true?
Not in terms of a logistical factor. It's more of a constraint in terms of like a tax factor, right? Because for each dollar over the tax, you have to pay starting next season $3 for the first bracket, and then it's increasing. It's more of a question of Jolie Kip and Co.'s limit in terms of the amount they're willing to spend on the roster. But they can give JK his full max if they want to.
Okay, that's good. At least the Butler is not sabotaging a possible JK extension. So as far as the JK extension goes, Warriors could just say, there was our offer, go get something better and we'll match it. Now, if they do that, is there any funny business a team could do in their offer to JK that would make the Warriors say, oh, well, I don't think we can match that? They could just offer them the max. That would be one thing. Is there anything they could do that would be funny business?
It's mostly just that, honestly. You could have a team out there who maybe doesn't value him necessarily at the max, but is, okay, we're going to give it to him just to force the Warriors to match it or lose him. That's, I think, the main concern. They could, but you can get a little tricky with like adding player options and stuff in there, giving JK a little bit more control. I think it's also significant that he accepts that offer sheet and wipes off this 5th year. So that's less team control you have. But I think it would really just come down to what the Warriors are willing to pay. I think is the question. So
could a team offer him a no trade clause?
Good question. I'm going to say no, because I don't think he has the necessary amount of years of service to have that included, but I'm not 100% sure on that. But I don't believe so, no.
Okay. Yeah, I thought it might have to be like a lot of years before you get it.
Yeah, I think it's the 35% max, which is, I think it's 10 plus years of service you have to get the NTC. But I'd have to double check on that.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. The Warriors famously were screwed by the cap rules back in the Gilbert Arenas days.
Yep.
They couldn't match his other team's offers because of the weird structure to the salary cap.
Yep.
Okay. So then thinking about other ways that Butler might mess with the books going forward, would this interfere in any way with re-signing Steph?
No.
Okay,
and
that's a short answer.
Yeah, the thing is, they have bird rights on Steph. They have bird rights on JK. Jimmy making a ton of money. The only constraint is that it makes your roster cost more. It's harder for them to stomach giving out these contracts when they're going to be paying like a crazy amount of tax. But in terms of like logistically, no. And then the thing specifically with Steph is, if you look here, him and Jimmy's contracts line up completely. They both expire after the 26-27 season. They're both extension eligible starting at the beginning of that year. So they're pretty much locked in together to see this thing out. And same thing with Draymond, who has a player option as well.
That's going to be an interesting year. That looks like the reset year.
Yeah, I'm assuming Draymond picks up that player option because who's giving him 28 million at that age? So I think basically 26, 27, that's the last hurrah. That's the last kind of final run of this era. And then after that, the next season, if JK's here and Moody's here and Pods gets an extension, and TJD gets an extension, then you're ushering in that new era of the baby dubs. The second timeline is taking off 27, 28.
Okay, now it's scheduled. It's on our calendar.
Yep.
In a very real way, because they'll either have to have gotten rid of those players or they will be giving them big contract extensions. All right, Perks, thanks for checking in. I'm sure we'll check in again sometime when something else dramatic happens this season. Otherwise, we'll see each other for Summer League, right?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Appreciate you having me. Y'all take care.
If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel. And if you didn't enjoy this video, I promise I'll do better next time.